Greetings, travelers, and welcome to another ponderous exploration about MMORPGs and my time spent hither and yon amongst their pixelated creations. And across all of these introspections, I'm beginning to realize that the impermanence of these worlds is just as important as their variety, and that no one game was meant to be played for an eternity. Especially not as your one and only game of choice. At least not for this traveler. But that is something I'll get into for another video. For now, let's bounce back to my history as we have just left the far-flung reaches of a gunslinging outer space saga for something a bit more recent in the land of New World. But before we get there, I need to mention that I didn't just disappear for 7 years after WildStar. I had a brief return to Star Wars: The Old Republic once I updated my PC, and with the nostalgia bug hitting pretty hard, I dabbled in a few private server iterations of vanilla World of Warcraft, just for old time's sake. None of which really captured my attention for too long though. At least, not until Classic WoW was released in 2019, and the time was ripe to hop back into Azeroth to recapture some forgotten feelings. Except this time, it would be with my wife, as we had the opportunity to make some new memories with a beloved pastime. Now, during this period, New World was going through development. Even though it didn't sound like my kind of MMO at the time, I had still applied to be a tester, which I tend to do for most MMORPGs I think I might enjoy. So during the fall of 2020, I received an invite from Amazon Game Studios to join the alpha phase of testing, which I promptly ignored. I was still content with my time rekindling a lost flame. That is until April of 2021. As my attention span was waning once again and I started searching for alternatives to my evening hobby, I remembered an email that was sitting in my archives collecting dust. So, I collected myself for yet another journey into a digital creation aiming to hold my attention. I started playing New World during its alpha phase sometime around April or May of 2021. Admittedly, the game is visually appealing, with lush coastal mangroves and deep coniferous forests pockmarked with craggy boulders. I'm not one to gush over realistic styles for artistic design, but New World is a pretty game with some nice attention to detail, albeit kind of a copy and paste for several of the different zones, but still nice to look at. But one thing that stood out to me more so than almost anything else is the sound design. Amazon definitely hired the right people for this department, because the sounds are an auditory pleasure which do a lot of heavy lifting for ambience, immersion, and satisfaction. Just the echoing effect of mining iron or chopping an oak is beautiful enough. But when coupled with idle aviary chatter from local fauna and the distant sounds from other explorers felling trees, it makes for a very acoustically delightful and favorable experience, which blends well with a wonderful score that holds up with some of the best gaming original soundtracks out there. Composed by Ramin Djawadi and Brandon Campbell, I think they truly embodied what it feels like to explore and inhabit a mysterious magical island occupied with a drift and ancient civilizations, searching for the answers of its hidden power. But the introduction of playable instruments in the style of Guitar Hero is one of my favorite additions to any MMO in probably the last 10 to 15 years. With the exception of singing, you could become a proper bard and offer a different assortment of buffs for players that were willing to tip you for your musical majesty. You could even invite others to play along with you as a full ensemble, or opt for a more personal style and serenade the masses with solo and duet guitar songs performed and recorded by John Oath. All of these artistic triumphs, coupled with a stripped down but engaging combat system, and a simple but effective use of magic is why I fell in love with this game, and continued to engage with it for the better part of a year. In lieu of turning this into a review of New World's game systems, I think it's better to just cut in here and say what caused me to stop playing. I became bored, plain and simple. The endgame loop wasn't enough to keep me invested. It kind of felt exhausting and more like a bag space simulation with the amount of gear you needed to keep on hand to stay competitive for the expedition mutators. The housing system felt pointless. There was an overall lack of customization for your character. Endgame crafting was a practice in RNG futility. I believe my best answer is that New World, like a lot of games nowadays, was pushed out too early and wasn't innovative enough for a market that has been copy and paste for a long time. Maybe if they had stuck to their original plan of a survival PvP-oriented world, could have been different, and maybe could have brought some new life to this stale cracker that is most MMOs nowadays. And for anyone who doesn't know, yes, New World was originally supposed to be a survival MMORPG, which changed directions at some point during their alpha testing phase, and since then has been transitioned to a storytelling MMO, slowly stripping away what was supposed to be and replacing it for their current vision. And they have lost quite a bit of their player base during this transition. So, where they started with a circle that was molded into a square, they are now having to chip away at that square to regain a circle, while at the same time trying to form a completely different shape. I'm sure it hasn't been easy for the developers, but it sucks that the player base is having to basically go through all of these transitions that should have been figured out before its release. But what do I know? I'm just another conscientious consumer that has been experiencing the changes and sometimes stagnant waters of the video game industry since 1983. Well, travelers, we're getting near the end of this journey, and I know there was more that I could have said or dove into for New World, but honestly, it was starting to feel like I've been repeating myself over and over across these introspective videos, and I kind of wanted to keep this train moving, much like my travels. So, I look forward to seeing everyone for one more pit stop before we mosey on to something different. Take care, and I'll see you then.